welcome to The Firm. On the show this week, it could be the year's biggest turf battle, sectoral regulators versus CCI. And Martin Sorrell is the latest on the list of CEOs down with spring fever. I'm talking shareholder spring fever. Our top story this week. One section in the Banking Laws Amendment Bill 2011 is fueling a potential turf war, with sectoral regulators on one end and the Competition Commission of India on the other. Now, the section says, and I quote, "Nothing contained in the Competition Act 2002 shall apply to any banking company, the State Bank of India, any subsidiary bank, any corresponding new bank, or any regional rural bank or cooperative bank or multi-state cooperative bank in respect of the matters relating to amalgamation, merger, reconstruction, transfer, reconstitution or acquisition." In short, RBI should be the sole regulator of the sector and CCI should have no jurisdiction. Now, similar demands have been made by the shipping and telecom sector regulators as well. In response to this limitation of powers, the Competition Commission chairman had this to say.
Why it is being perceived that what the competition regulator does can as well be done by the sectoral regulators. Not so. The legal architecture doesn't provide for that. And if it did provide for that, then the legislature in its wisdom would not have enacted the Competition Act. The two sets of bodies, the sectoral regulators and the market regulators, have necessarily to coexist. If this virus spreads, then you might as well one day wind up the Competition Commission.
Now, this debate is certainly not unique to India. It's happened in the UK, it's happened in the US. So this week, Paiswini Upadhyay gets experts thinking aloud on how other jurisdictions have managed these turf issues and what India can do to strike a balance.
In the UK, there actually hasn't been very much debate historically as regards mergers, where it's always been pretty much a consensus that the competition authorities are the ones to decide on that. As regards competition rules more generally, anti-cartel, anti-abuse of dominance rules and so forth, we've come to an accommodation actually where there is what's called concurrency, so both the sectoral regulator and the competition authority can use those rules to conduct inquiries, not both together, that's governed by a memorandum of understanding, and actually in fact it's always been the competition authority who has tended to take the lead. They've been very little used by the sectoral regulators.
In the United States, we've essentially had the same debate that India is now experiencing. And here in the United States, we've concluded that the government operates best when it is acting as an umpire, not a bowler or a batsman. And for that reason, the trend over the last 30 or 40 years has been away from regulation and toward competition.
If I was to give you a blanket answer, definitely no sector should be out of the purview of the Competition Commission of India. But I would have some qualifications that we'll go along with as we proceed with this discussion. But no sector should be kept out, because competition, the law, should affect all sectors.
In the UK, there are no sectors that are specifically excluded from the competition rules or the merger control rules. The only qualification I would give to that is that in certain special cases, the government, not the sectoral regulator, can put in place what's called a public interest intervention notice. And when that happens, the competition authority will still advise on the competition aspects of a merger, but the government will also take into account other wider public interest issues and will then come to the decision. Now, this is very much the exception, not the rule. It's rarely used, and it really only applies to national security, media plurality and stability of the financial system cases.
Exemptions from the antitrust laws in the United States are disfavored, and therefore they are very rare and limited in scope. There is only one industry in which the antitrust authorities have no say about whether a merger should be permitted, and that's in the railroad industry. In 3 other industries, though, antitrust authorities share authority with sectoral regulators in terms of whether mergers should be permitted. And those sectors include banking, certain aspects of electricity, and telecommunications.
No sector has the kind of differentiation that banking does. And I think we need to just understand this. Banking is a part of the overall financial and economic policies of government. We have seen how when banking is not closely regulated, is not closely watched, it can go completely out of hand, as it did in the United States in 2008, and the American economy is still seeing the effects of what happened. They have not got over that yet. So, the banking sector is a complex sector which has fundamental effects on the economy. Of course, every other sector will say the same thing, but banking is much more fundamental.
If certain sectors are exempted from oversight by the general competition authorities and left to be looked at only by their relevant sectoral regulators, I think I'd have two concerns. One would be around inconsistency of application across different sectors of the economy, and by definition the exempted sectors, as it were, would be very important sectors. And the other worry I might have would be around, well, perhaps not so far as regulatory capture, but does the regulator who is dealing with the regulated company day in, day out on a whole range of issues have the same kind of distance, objectivity and breadth of experience to draw on that a competition authority has when it comes to assess a transaction or a market practice? So those would be my two concerns.
The initial rationale for separating merger review from the antitrust authority's jurisdiction and placing it in the hands of regulators was really twofold. First was a sense that some industries are natural monopolies and therefore must be regulated. And second, it was felt that there are certain societal needs that override the need for competition. But as technology has advanced, we have found that natural monopolies have actually not been natural at all. And so antitrust authority, competition authority, has replaced regulatory authority in some of those areas. And so perhaps the most notable example is the antitrust analysis, competition analysis in the airline industry. Originally, the Civil Aeronautics Board heavily regulated the airline industry. In fact, it not only regulated prices and routes that should be flown, it also told the airlines the type of stewardess or flight attendant uniforms that should be worn and the size of sandwiches that should be served on the planes. And it goes to show you just how absurd it can become when a government acts not as an umpire but as a bowler or a batsman. The Department of Justice recommended on several occasions that the Civil Aeronautics Board block domestic mergers. At that time, the CAB had the authority to review mergers. And the CAB ignored the Department of Justice recommendations and allowed those mergers in the airline industry to proceed. Ultimately, the Civil Aeronautics Board was dissolved, and that authority over mergers in the airline industry was placed in the hands of the Department of Justice.
The argument in the case of the banking sector is that because there are so many different types, it is much better that the Reserve Bank of India regulates them. Now, I think to a great extent that is correct and fair, because the Reserve Bank of India is doing a job of regulating them, but it has to regulate them on matters which have not to do with the broad competition issues. By that I don't mean the competing interest rates. That is something that the Reserve Bank takes care of. But basically mergers and acquisitions. I think mergers and acquisitions should come under the Competition Commission as far as banking is concerned. But I would only make one caveat that that regulation should be in consultation with the Reserve Bank, because there is a lot of other issues, foreign policy issues, relationship issues with other countries, economic policy issues, which come into the picture when you are looking at the regulation of banks.
It would be wrong to pretend, I suspect, that there are never frustrations. I'm sure there are occasions when the sectoral regulators would like to, see a case through to the end rather than see it referred on to the competition authorities. But actually, by and large, it works pretty well. Not forgetting that the sectoral regulator, of course, is in constant dialogue anyway with the regulated companies in its sector over things like license modifications, price controls, perhaps, this sort of thing. So the sectoral regulators have plenty of levers at their disposal, regulatory levers, such that perhaps then there is contentment to leave the use of the competition rules, which are very specialised after all, to the competition authorities, who do that all the time and have, the expert resources needed to pursue that.
Dual jurisdiction undermines certainty and predictability for businesses and can result in conflicting outcomes and blocked deals. One of the most recent examples involves an energy deal that was announced a couple of years ago. The Department of Justice cleared the deal 18 months ago, but the energy regulator only cleared the deal about a week ago. In another instance in the energy sector, the Department of Justice imposed a certain set of remedies on the deal. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission imposed an additional set of remedies on the deal, but then a state regulatory agency that was also reviewing the deal ended up blocking it, and so the deal crumbled.
No doubt at all. It will lead to a lot of turf battles. Already you got this case that's going on between the Forward Markets Commission and if I remember rightly, the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission on the exchange futures and electricity as to who should regulate that. And the courts had to decide that. So yes, there will be turf battles, but I think the answer to this is not an exclusive jurisdiction. I think it is a jurisdiction of the Competition Commission, especially when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, but in consultation with the sectoral regulator, because the sectoral regulator may have some special cases that he wants to put up, and the Competition Commission must take those into consideration.
We'll know more on this when the Cabinet considers the matter, and hopefully that will happen soon. Let's take a quick break on the firm. Coming up on the other side, Martin Sorrell is the latest on the list of CEOs down with spring fever. I'm talking shareholder spring fever.